Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, firstly, a big thank you to all of you guys for watching last week's episode of the show and commenting, and a big thank you to those viewers that emailed in and said, if you're getting hold of some of that John McCrae, I'll have a bottle. So I duly indeed got in a case, and it's now up on the website, so if any of you are still thinking about purchasing a bottle of that John McCrae, which was stunningly good, then you can indeed do so, and obviously a big thank you to those guys that purchased it. Anyway, so on to this week's episode of the show. This week's episode of the show, as you can see from the title page, it features the Speyside Distillery. Now, it's been a number of years since I've done an episode of the show on the Speyside Distillery. I think 2015. Certainly that's when I tasted the range, and that was the last time I actually had a visit from a rep from the distillery. So funnily enough, I had a visit from the new rep not so long ago, a few weeks ago. I had a phone call from the new rep, Peter Mackay, who I've known from his time working at Morrison & Mackay, and he said, can I come down and show you the range? And I said, ooh, do bears in the wood. More than happy to sort of have a look at what they're up to now. And I guess as a distillery, they were okay. It was okay. I kind of, I suppose, always had this impression that they were not Macallan clones, that's the wrong word, but the whiskey was often more sherried than anything else, and I wasn't necessarily sort of completely enamoured by those sort of bottlings, although in fairness it wasn't really. I mean, the going back to that 2015, you had the Spey 12, which was American oak and bourbon. I think it was then the 18 that was sherry matured. I think there was one called Chairman's Selection, I think, or something like that, which was sherry matured, and just kind of stuck in my head that the Speyside Distillery just used a lot of sherry, and it was, you know, not a sort of a distillery that you know, I was sort of jumping up and down about, shall we say, and subsequently that's why I really never did a great deal with the distillery. But I think since then, I think there's been a change of ownership. I think I can't remember exactly everything that I was told. Sign of getting old, I think. You just forget things. But anyway, so Peter kindly left me a selection of their current range, including a little drop of new make. Now, I always enjoy trying new make spirit. I mean, for me, like I said, it is the DNA of any given whiskey. It's you know, the basics. It's just great to see it. You know how. What the spirit character is like before you start adding on the layers of maturation and oak and all that kind of stuff, and it gives you a nice insight into sort of how the range is kind of like built up around the sort of like the character of the new make spirit. So I'm quite looking forward to sort of tasting that and obviously exploring the rest of the range. So anyway, not really a great deal more to say, so let's just have a look at today's lineup. Right, so as I said, we're going to kick off with the new make spirit. So obviously I've only got a smidgen. This is pretty much I'm guessing at their filling strength of 70.6. I couldn't find out the exact information with regards to their filling strength, but if that's the case, then I mean it sort of looks like their cut points are industry sort of standardish sort of cut points, I would have thought. You know, sort of mid 70s to sort of, you know, mid 60s roughly, being your sort of like your middle cut. Maybe they're a little bit sort of more towards the sort of like the 70%. Well, it's possible, but we shall see. The other interesting thing about this is when we get on to tasting it, apparently the fermentation times are relatively long. I mean, now I'm no scientist, and the fermentation is all about science at the end of the day, but very simply put, in my knowledge, 48 hours is, generally speaking, is sort of the shortest sort of period of time that distilleries will ferment for, and you get sort of a relatively fruity wort, but more cereal orientated. Leave it for a bit longer, sort of 60, 80 odd hours, and you're now starting to get into the realms of the more fruitier esters. And then sort of obviously beyond that, and I can't remember the exact sort of time of the fermentation at Speyside, but apparently once you start to get beyond sort of 60 or 80 odd hours, you start to get more of the lactic notes coming through in your wort. Again, of course, this is all kind of complicated by temperature, because I mean, obviously, take for example Glencadam, wonderfully fruity new make spirit, yet they only ferment for about sort of 48, 52 hours, something like that, and yet they come away with this really sort of fruity new make, and according to them it was all down to the temperature. The lower the temperature, the more fruitier esters; the higher the temperature, the more higher alcohols you get, the less fruit. So it's all about sort of juggling your time and your and temperature, basically, when it comes to fermentation. But anyway, like I said, I'm no scientist. A lot of the knowledge I've kind of picked up is sort of bits and pieces, and like I said, I'm not a scientist, so I don't understand fully the sort of chemical reactions and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I think I know how to taste whiskey, and I think that's pretty good for me. Anyway, so let's move on. Second bottle we'll be looking at is called the Trutina. Now this is 100% American oak, so just blows my preconception. Well, not preconception, you know what I mean about the whole sherry cask business. So this is bottled at 46%. Third bottling we're looking at is the cask strength version of the Trutina. This is batch number 1, and it is 59.1%, so no shrinking violet, shall we say. This seems to be the only survivor in the range from the last time I tasted it, in 2015, the Tenne, which I believe is I think about 8 years old. It doesn't obviously carry an age statement, none of them do, which yeah, I think is quite refreshing. Got no issue with that. And I believe it spends about 6 months finishing in tawny port, and it's actually really quite a nice colour. It's got a sort of rosé wine sort of pinkish hue to it, which I would have thought it's probably spent a little longer than 6 months, but you know, apparently it is indeed 6 months, so there you go. Then we are going to move on to the one and only sherry bottling that I've got here. This is the Royal Choice, bottled at 46%. I think this has all got something to do with Byron and giving a gift to King whatever his face was of a cask of Speyside whisky, and you know, slightly tenuous I guess, but you know, Royal Choice is what this particular bottling is called. It's not cheap, comes in a nice wooden box as you would expect for an expensive £150 whisky. Apparently it is a blend of bourbon cask and sherry. It's not fully sherry. The sherry casks apparently come from the late 90s and early 2000s, so well, depending on how early into 2000, you're looking at sort of what, 18, 20 odd years old, something like that. And the bourbon casks are much younger, so it's essentially a vatting of American oak and bourbon, so hopefully the balance should be really nice. And the final bottling we'll be looking at is their peated bottling called Fumare, bottled at 46%. Don't know the peating levels, but it's, well, we shall find out. We shall see if I can figure out what sort of peating level it is when we finally get around to tasting it. So that's today's lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of new make. Right, okay, so let's see what the new make gives us then, shall we? really creamy. Obviously the lactose character is coming through really strongly on this on the nose. There's a bit of cereal, but not a great deal. There's some lovely fruit as well. There's some sort of nascent apricot and a little bit of pineapple possibly. There's a little bit of a sort of off the still oiliness, but but this is actually really soft, really fruity. Well, not hugely fruity. We're not kind of Glencadam fruitiness, but it's got a lovely fruit character. You know, you could almost sort of drink this now if you're that way inclined, shall we say. I mean, it's got a lovely softness, and you know, it's just, this is the sort of spirit that cries out to be just aged in American oak, in my opinion, because it has got an awful lot of character. Like I said, really sort of milky and soft. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like now. Still quite milky and soft, and you know, for 70%, I mean, I'm not getting no real alcohol burn. Yes, I can feel the alcohol. There's a little bit more oiliness, a little bit more sort of off the still character, a touch more cereal possibly, but again, and the fruitiness is kind of more latent. It's not sort of an exuberant sort of fruit monster, but it's got enough fruit there, and like I said, it's the overwhelming characteristic of it is kind of milky, creamy, that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean that is pretty damn good new make, it has to be said. You know, at the end of the day, you ought to bottle it, I think. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Right, now I'm getting a lot less of the milkiness. It's now sort of more rawer, more off the still, more oily. Again, although there's a little bit more fruit now, it has to be said, possibly. Lovely barley character. Possibly the emphasis a little bit more on the barley. But again, you know, lovely, really nice. Let's see what the palate's like. Again, maybe not quite so milky, oilier, more of the off the still notes. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's something that you could just get away with bottling. I mean, again, it has that sort of latent fruit character, but there is a sort of certain sort of a light faintiness that obviously the oak is going to sort of remove, you know, pretty quickly. So it kind of gives you the impression that you could get away with bottling this at a relatively young age. There's not too many congeners, there's not too much faintiness, and I'm guessing, like I said, it's probably that the cut is relatively narrow, and it's going to allow them to sort of, you know, get away with bottling this at, you know, a relatively young age, because it's almost drinkable now. So, you know, 5 years in cask, you know, you think you're sort of like, you know, but anyway, so yeah, that's kind of like a nice starter. That's given us our kind of bedrock, shall we say. So let's move on. Okay, so moving on to the 46% bottling of Trutina. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Oh, now that is nice. That is lovely. I mean, I don't remember the old Spey 12 getting me quite as excited as this. Actually, it's got the slight sort of milky barley character. I'm certainly getting that succulent American oak. Wonderfully fruity, lots of fruit, apricot, pineapple, almost slight sort of green fruit. There's an edge to it, a green fruit note kind of coming through. Maybe a touch of lime, bit of wood smoke, some straw. I mean, you know, it doesn't feel that old. I mean, I would guess again 6 to 8 possibly, maybe. I mean, this is retailing for about 38 to 40 quid. And you know what, that's lovely for that kind of money. I mean, forget the fact there's no age statement, but it's not raw. It's certainly got, you know, plenty of character, plenty of barley character, you know, not hugely oaky. There's enough there, and it's got that lovely sort of aromatic sweetness to it, you know. What's not to like? Anyway, let's see what the power's like. Soft, oily, slightly milky. Again, I like the way that slight milkiness kind of merges in with the vanilla from the American oak. Again, some pleasant fruit. It's got a bit more of an edge to it, a bit more of a sort of a liminess, but again, apricot, pineapple, touch of straw. A little bit richer on the oak, on the mid palate. I'm getting a little bitterness on the finish, but that's not sort of, that's kind of nicely balancing up the richness of the fruit. It's got a good grip, it's got a good body, it's got a good length. I mean, and like I said, you know, for under 40 quid, that's pretty damn good value for money, I think, and I really like that. Not a lot else to say, really. Right, okay, so let's move on to the cask strength Trutina. So this is 59.1%. So at 59.1%, the spirit ain't going to be that old, should we say? But if you know, if it's anything like the 46% bottling, which I can't believe it isn't, it should be pretty impressive. Slightly more intense. More aromatic, a little bit more nutty. Again, I'm getting pear, apricot, ginger, honeysuckle, sweet American oak, a little bit sweeter oak character, a little bit of wood smoke. It's a sort of, it's not quite as creamy, in a sort of creamy sense. It's more of a sort of ice creamy kind of. Probably doesn't make a great deal of sense, but I know what I'm trying to say. It's more vanilla ice cream on with the cask strength bottling. But the intensity is wonderful. I mean, and again, this is what, about 55 quid. Bloody good. No harsh edges, no roughness. Again, soft, fruity, with grip and oak, and yeah. See what the pulse like. Dangerously drinkable. Again, yes, I can just taste the alcohol, but it's not sort of harsh, it's not overly masking the finish. It's adding a sort of a piquancy, a little bit of spice, emphasising the sort of the citrus on the finish. Again, it kind of kicks off with some lovely oak. It's nutty, it's vanillaed, it's clean. There's plenty of barley, there's a bit of sort of toastiness, some fruit, apricot, again, pineapple, a little bit of lime. Citrus kind of comes through nicely on the mid palate, with a little bit of wood smoke and spice. Again, very subtle spice. We're not talking sort of, you know, hugely peppery spices. Just a little bit of spice, more kind of gingery sort of spice, I think. And again, it really doesn't need any water. It's got that kind of lovely, intense character to it, and softness. And oh, I mean, that's really, really impressive. I am, you know, it has to be said, very impressed. So we'll put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Slightly more creamier, slightly more estery, some lovely fruit. Oak is a little bit subtler, still a little nutty and toasty, but not quite so obvious. I mean, that's just a lovely nose. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, what is not like to like about it? It's got fruit, oak, citrus, barley, you know, a little bit of spice, you know. Lovely, absolutely lovely. Let's see what the pal's like. Softer, more barleyed, a little spicier as well in actual fact. Oak is still quite there, still quite toasty, but a little subtler, I would guess. Maybe a little bit more sweeter vanillins. Again, it's got that lovely kind of softness. It's got that sort of milky, vanilla-y sort of character. A little more spice now, certainly on the finish. A little bit more bitterness. But again, I think that's just really nicely balanced. It's got plenty of character. And like I said, for 55 quid, it might sound like quite a lot of money, and indeed 55 quid is quite a lot of money. But you know, I really think that's pretty good value, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Tenne. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Quite aromatic. Red berries, juicy, touch of barley, vanilla. It feels like it has a better balance than I remember it from last time, but I mean that was 4 years ago, and a lot of whiskey has flowed underneath the bridge, shall we say, since then, and it's okay, it's pleasant. I mean, it's got a good balance. I think if you like a wine cask finish, then you'd be quite happy with this. I mean, and what is it? You can get it online for just under 37 quid. Again, you know, pretty good value for money, I think. There's a touch of spice. I mean, I will give it that the nose is a little simplistic for me. I would have liked to have seen. It doesn't seem to have the kind of complexity of the Trutina, but I think it's really well balanced. It's certainly not overly porty. Yeah, a little bit of licorice. Yeah, definitely got a little whiff of red licorice then. Anyway, let's see what that's like. A little heavier on the port, it has to be said. Some juicy dried fruits, red fruits, spice. A little short, a little, I wouldn't say overly bitter. The bitter tannins are a little bit more noticeable, but then that's kind of port casks for you. Again, I don't think the balance is particularly bad. There's some vanilla, there's some milkiness. I mean, I think the thing is that having tasted the new make, I can kind of pick out the new make character underneath all of that oak, whereas if you were just tasting it kind of on your own, without having sort of done that kind of comparison, you might kind of miss it, because the port is a little heavier on the palate. But again, I don't think it's unbalanced. I think it's pleasant, and like I said, for sort of like, you know, for 37 quid or whatever it is, you really can't argue with that. It is not a bad whiskey at all. So yeah, nice. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Royal Choice, bottled at 46%. Let's see what those gives us on this end, shall we? Chunky, herbal, oloroso, licorice, ginger, raisinated fruit, spice, touch of orange, a little bit of wood smoke. There's a bit of, I'm getting a bit of sort of vanilla underneath that, a little bit of barley. Okay, the balance is not too bad. It's not blowing me away, it has to be said. It's got a mellowness, it's got some maturity, obviously, but it's a bit straightforward, it has to be said. It's certainly not got fireworks that I would expect from a whiskey that's retailing for 150 quid. It's not bad, and I think if you had told me that this was 70 or 80 quid, I'd have probably said, yeah, okay, I can kind of live with that. But for 150 quid, I'd really be expecting a lot more, it has to be said. But anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Kicks off quite mentholated, herbal, fig, prune, touch of walnut, date, a little bit short, a little bit grippy, a little bit sort of dry, certainly on the mid palate. There's a bit of American oak character kind of underneath all of that. The balance isn't too bad, but it is certainly skewed more in the sherry end of the spectrum, and it is pleasantly spiced, but again, it doesn't really have the fireworks for its price tag, and I think that's pretty much about it. It's pleasant, it's okay, nothing wrong with it, reasonably good quality, but it doesn't strike me as a £150 bottle of whiskey. It's not got, for example, it doesn't have a sort of like a, you know, a grip you by the nads kind of intensity of sherry going sort of screaming oloroso herbal character at you. But it doesn't have the sort of like the kind of dusty, old, mature sherry character either. It's kind of somewhere in, well, I don't even know if it's somewhere in between. It's kind of, it's okay, it's sort of, yeah, okay, I've got some sherry, it's all sort of, and like I said, you know, I think if you're going to sort of shell out 150 quid for something, then, you know, you've got to have some kind of explosion in the trouser department, as Jeremy Clarkson would say, and this is just doesn't really quite have it. I mean, the quality is okay, but you know, when you're asking that kind of money, you've really got to kind of come through and deliver the goods, as they say, and unfortunately I don't think this actually does.
I don't want you to be my mother. I don't want this to just
Right, okay, and let's finish off with a little bit of peat then. Always like to finish with a bit of peat, so let's see what the Fumare gives us then, shall we? Yeah, that's actually quite nice. It's got a lovely balance. It's actually got a lot more sweeter fruit. I mean, this is quite the perversity of this kind of bottling, that the fruit is more sweeter, it's more aromatic, it's more juicy. There's a delicate earthy peatiness. There's a little bit of smoke. Yeah, I really like that. I think the balance is absolutely spot on. This is, to me, what a peated Spey should be about. It shouldn't be trying to kind of be an Isla clone and just ramping up the peat just for the hell of it. It should be integrated. It should be, you know, it should say I'm a Speyside whisky first and foremost, and I have a little bit of peat. And you know what this does? This says that. And I mean, it's about mid-40s, which I'm quite happy with as a price. It's got some lovely depth to it. It's got a touch of heather. There's some coffee, some tar. Like I said, it is, to me, a classic peated Spey. This is sort of like, you know, exactly how it should. Oops, excuse me. Exactly what it should be like. You know. So that's right. A little bit fresher, touch more citric character, earthy, violety, subtle violets, more on the finish in actual fact. Again, a little bit heavier on the peat, but again, I don't think it's unbalanced. It's quite earthy. It's got that lovely mainland peat earthy kind of character. Again, lovely fruit underneath. It's all quite balanced. It's got a little spiciness on the finish, just kind of like goes eek on the finish. A little bit of bitterness from the oak as well. Again, doesn't taste particularly old. Again, I would guess somewhere in the sort of like, you know, 6 to 8 years old kind of range. But again, it's perfectly drinkable. Lovely aftertaste. I mean, that like I said, when I was nosing it, I think that just basically says classic peated Spey. We're not going OTT on the peat. I mean, I would guess, what would I think that was, parts per million. I wouldn't have said that was much more than 15. If possible, maybe 20. But I would kind of stick my oar in at sort of 15. It's not quite as lightly peated as, say, something like Cubocan or the earlier peated expressions from Agnoc, which were about 11 parts per million. There's a little bit more peat intensity, but it's certainly, I don't think, into the 20s. I would say 15, 18 maybe at the most. So really nicely balanced, and you get the sort of the fruit, you get a little bit of the oak, you get a bit of the peat. It is just, at the end of the day, like I said, just really very nicely balanced. So yeah, I like that.
Where have you gone now? Where my life is.
Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Like I said, a big thank you to Speyside Distillery and to Peter Mackay, the rep, for leaving me the samples. Incidentally, I did get a sample of this. Bloody colour on that. This is the Benin Dube. How do you pronounce it? The Black Mountain. Well, it should be called bloody Benin Ola or Ola Dub or something like that. Bloody engine oil. I've tasted it before. I did think about including it in the tasting, but it's a sort of bottling in its own right, and it's kind of, yes, it's kind of you know, recharred and all that kind of stuff, casks, and it's port casks, and you know, to get it that colour, you know, industrial levels of caramel, shall we say. So I wouldn't be particularly what's the word, enthusiastic about it, shall we say. It has its market, it has shall we say, I think it's a bit of an aberration. I mean, I remember the what was it, the Q Dub bottling, which they did to sort of ape the the Manic Moor bottling Lock Do. And that was kind of like, oh, it was like, how much caramel can we sort of chuck into this to sort of, you know, and it's kind of, yeah, it is what it is, as I say. But anyway, like I say, it's an aberration. I don't kind of see it as part of the Speyside range, because it isn't. It's a brand in its own right, and I'm not going to taste it. But we will talk about what I have just tasted. Speyside new make. I mean, it just goes to show that, you know, when you have a new make that's as pleasant and as lovely as that, you just don't smother it in sherry. You stick it in American oak. You just allow the oak to kind of remove a little bit of the faintiness, and just add a little bit more vanilla, and it kind of, you know, it just bolsters it. You know, it's like, you know, lovely new make. What is the point in shoving it into sherry? You know, you're just going to sort of mask it all. All right, okay, you can argue that the royal choice was a batting rather than a finish, or wholly sherry matured. But, you know, and yes, if you knew what you were looking for, you could find an element of the distillery character. But at the end of the day, what you need to do is you need to stick it in American oak. You add a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of soft spice, you know, that kind of thing, a little bit of wood smoke, and the Trutina is just absolutely gorgeous. It builds, and that is the key. It's all about, you know, not swamping, it's building. It's taking the sort of like the base material, the base spirit, and just adding a little bit of extra levels, layers, and just building upon that as a starting point. And I think the Trutina and the cask strength Trutina do it just absolutely fabulous. And I've got no problem stocking that or selling it. Price is absolutely brilliant, and you really should buy it. The Spey 10, like I said, it seems to me that it has a better balance than I remember it. Maybe that's just the fog of memory, who knows. Maybe it's the battings. You know, these are all batch bottlings, obviously. Maybe this particular batch just shows a little bit more balance. But again, it's kind of like, yeah, okay. The Royal Choice, I think I've kind of panned it enough, I suppose. I don't think it's worth 150 quid, full stop. You know, I think, and I hate to say this, I think the distillery are having a bit of a laugh. It's not worth that at all. It just doesn't have the interest that I would expect from a whisky of that magnitude, shall we say. I'm sure that the distillery owners will completely disagree with me on that point, because obviously they bottled it and put it in the fancy packaging and all that kind of stuff. But to me, yeah, no. The Fumari, on the other hand, like I said, I think that is just absolutely spot on. I mean, that is exactly what I want from a peated Speyside whisky. I want it to basically have the Speyside character with a bit of peat. I don't want it to be an Isla clone, and that certainly isn't. And I'm more than happy to stock that. And, you know, 40 odd quid, like I say, I don't think I have a problem with that one whatsoever. So there you go. That's this week's episode of the show. I know Speyside is not exactly the most high profile of the Speyside distilleries, but I really think you should give them a go. So there you go. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Hope you enjoyed it. All I have to say is good dramming and good afternoon.
Go ahead.